Hi, everyone. Welcome to Chicago Autism Network's virtual parent workshops. We are excited to have Danielle Marino here to present to us on supportive parenting through anxious childhood emotions. But before we start, I want to give a special shout out to our sponsors, to Bluebird Day, Chicago Pediatric Therapy and Wellness Center, CST Academy, Leap Forward, Lumiere Children's Therapy, North Shore Pediatric Therapy, Progressive Behavior Solutions, Stride Autism Centers, and Strive ABA Consultants. Those were our platinum sponsors for our last gala, as well as our silver sponsors, who are Brighter Care ABA, IS Landing, ICG Rehab, and Westside Cultural Foundation. Chicago Autism Network is a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping families find and afford effective autism therapy and supports. So if you'd like to help us support local families and provide content for parents throughout the world, if you want to donate, you can text Shy Autism, so CHI Autism, to 44321. And with that, I will turn the time over to Danielle.
Thank you so much, Kimmy. Thank you to Chicago Autism Network for allowing families to access information like this. I found out about you from some other some other talks that I was listening to that were actually really helpful in my practice and helping families. I am Danielle Marino. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and excited to be able to share this with you today because it is usually kind of restricted. It's kind of pricey. It's pricey to as a clinician to get trained in SP.A.C.E. It comes out of Yale University, and therefore it kind of makes it pricey to access SP.A.C.E. Because we need to pay the costs of the training. So I'm excited that this can be free and accessible to many. I did make a mistake. My family celebrates Rosh Hashanah, but we celebrate on the second night, and tonight is night one, and I goofed up. So there's quite a few people who couldn't make it because of Rosh Hashanah and are going to be watching the recording. That is why we are recording. Kimmy will turn off the recording when we go towards questions and answers later. So you know that part. Okay. Um, Here's a little bit about my business is SuperKids Chicago, a little bit about what we treat. We are very small, intentionally, myself and one other practitioner. His name is Phil Garcia. He's incredible. He is kind of magical, particularly with boys. They just love him and are willing to open up in ways that I can't get them to. So when I met him, I've known him for years, but I knew I had to hire him. So there's a little bit about us. We accept Blue Cross Blue Shield PPO, LIRA, and we will also help with any outside of network, making sure that you get reimbursement. Okay, so you can look up about that. Just a note that we're going to be doing an overview of SP.A.C.E. SP.A.C.E. is an evidence-based training program and treatment program for parents of anxious children that has been studied and clinically reviewed and has been proven to be quite effective. There's different levels of efficacy depending upon the groups who are being treated, but all of them are showing great progress and gains, including those on the autistic spectrum. And I will be specifying a little bit more of SP.A.C.E. for autism later in the talk. But I'm going to start with a general overview, which is going to be the same for pretty much every kiddo. It is not the same for every age, and some of the suggestions are going to need to be modified. So I'm really hoping that you'll take this, everything with a grain of salt, and then seek out a practitioner. I'm one of them, but there's many more. I gave the link there. This talk, again, will be accessible, and you'll be able to, in the recording, if you want to refer to that link in the future. And then you also can read the book by Dr. Eli Lebowitz out of Yale. I think he goes by Ellie. I always say Eli because I know so many kids named Eli, but I think he goes by Ellie. Sorry about that. And Dr. Lebowitz trained me, and he is the practitioner out of Yale who founded this program. And there's just a little humor about the anxiety of many parents, including moms. Okay, so just let's start with what we used to do and what we tend to do now. So even in the 15 years of my practicing in the field, it's changed quite a bit. And part of that is efficacy because you learn pretty quickly that what we used to do often doesn't work alone. It can work. And so what we used to do is just teaching the child skills. And still families come to me and the first thing they say is, I want you to meet with my child and teach them coping skills. And we do that. Mostly Phil, I do some of that as well. But we also now help train the parents on how to react because parents are often enlisted by the children in their anxious situations that could be to accommodate them, and we'll talk about that in a second. So now we have another component. We have actually it's really helpful because as you'll see from the next slide, a lot of children are unwilling, and that's partly why one of the reasons it's not so effective, because you can have a child bring them to therapy, try to teach them to deep breathe, count back from five, use your coping skills, and sometimes in the office they'll do it, but they often will not with their parents at home. And so they kind of say a big nope to that. And that is really when S.P.A.C.E shines because we cannot expose a child to, which is the primary treatment of anxiety, would be exposure therapy. And we can't really do that if they don't want to, if they refuse. But we can using S.P.A.C.E. And that's help getting the parent to kind of change some of their behavior. So what is S.P.A.C.E? It's teaching parents how to reduce their accommodation. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. It's something we all do. It's not bad per se. It's just not helpful when the child is exhibiting anxiety. So it's not about blaming parents. It's not about saying parents caused this. In fact, some children can genetically be predisposed to anxiety. So it doesn't, and none of this is about blame, but it's what we can do with that and help what parents can do to reduce the anxiety by gradually exposing the child to the discomfort, which they don't tend to like. And we'll also talk about that. It's a systematic treatment approach. It's been tested in clinical trials, found effective. It's been tested specifically with autism, and the journal article is online. And I left the tiny URL at the bottom for you to read. It's very interesting. To get the details on those families and what they did there. It focuses entirely on parents, providing them with the tools. At no point are you required to pressure your child into doing things they don't want to do. So it's really the parent behavior that we're changing. Again, not necessarily because it caused it, but because parents get sucked in. And how do they get sucked in? Well, family accommodation. And this is something we all do. Again, it's not about blame. It's really changes we make when we love someone. It's kind of a sign of love. It's intended to alleviate a child's distress. It sometimes it originally stems from the psychopathology of the child, but we know that accommodation, and again, I'm going to give you some details on that next, it alleviates distress in the short term. So it feels like it's working, but it's associated with increased symptoms, actually poor treatment outcomes. It goes on, disruption to the family. And so accommodation, let's skip to the next slide just to be clear here. What we're talking about is things we all do, and they're actions in which we really try to make the child feel less distress. And I would hope many of these are things you would think, oh yeah, those are really kind things to do. Like if you have a 3-year-old that doesn't want to say their name and they're shy, we're not going to torture and force a child. You must say your name. That's not going to be helpful. Maybe in the beginning, we start with, oh, I'll just say their name. Their name is Sam. He's a little shy. The problem is for some kids, this goes on and on and on. And what originally was just 3 is now 5 or older, and the parent is still talking to them for them. The child is refusing to order food. The child, unless they'll whisper to the parent. It depends on the family, but these are some examples. It's really kind of reassuring the child for a non-threatening issue. The child perceives it as threatening, but it's actually not. Um, and just a reminder that I am going to do questions towards the end, so please be writing those down. Other examples of accommodations that we all tend to do, oftentimes we're laying down in bed with our children until they fall asleep. I already put the speaking there. These are just common ones that I hear. Holding a hand to go down to the basement. I mean, who wasn't afraid? I'm still kind of afraid of like when I go to Airbnbs, like of basements. It's that makes sense, and you kind of want someone to go with you. Again, the problem is not doing it once or twice. The problem is when the child then requires you to do it, and that becomes the burden, and then they demand it. And so and then they require it to move forward. And that's what we're going to have to figure out. How do we help reduce that? The way we're going to do that, and that is really what SPACE comes uh, to a head with, is a message of confidence, is changing adult behavior to send a message that I'm confident you can get through this. And that originally we might think, well, I'm confident you can get through it. Another time I'll lay with you tonight. But we're trying to send the consistent message that with minimal support, we're really confident you can get through it. So we reevaluate in the program of SPACE when you're doing it with a provider for your particular child, defined for your um, child and their age and their needs. You would look at what am I accommodating in our household, and usually there's a host of things, and I usually identify about one in the beginning to focus on. We then focus on giving supportive and accepting statements before we touch the accommodations. So, one of the messages that Dr. Lebowitz will talk about in his book, if you want to listen to the audiobook, read the book, or go on his website, all of that will share this similar message that we tend to say you're good, you're fine, but we really want to have a message to kids of acceptance and support. I know how it feels to you right now, but you can get through this. So this would be kind of the pre-step to SPACE, is starting with making sure your language is sending a message of confidence. And then if we want to get into the real steps of SPACE, the next one is going to be looking at your actions. But feel free to write questions down. We'll come to towards the end after I go through this overview. So as I said, message of confidence in your language is going to be kind of a pre to starting SPACE. But when you actually start SPACE, which I would recommend with a provider, you would actually write out a letter of what you're going to do differently and present it to your child. And the reason you would do this is the letter makes it real. It really is important. I have so many families who just want to have a conversation. The letter makes a difference. It feels real to kids. It's printed out. And what we would do is pick one accommodation. So it might be mom and dad are going to stay in the room, but we're not going to lay on the bed with you while you go to sleep. So it's kind of defining the new behaviors and we're going to be scaffolding back. We're not saying, most of the cases, we are not saying, I'm just not going to walk with you in the basement. Good luck, kid, and slamming the doors or in the dark room. Absolutely not. We're going to probably say, I'm going to walk halfway down the stairs with you to the basement when you need to go get your whatever blankie that you want or your toys, and I will wait and then we will walk up together. So there's a way that we're going to scaffold or pull back from the full accommodation, but you typically just pick one to focus on. The point of the letter is it holds you accountable because kids do tend to push back. They don't like these changes. They want you to lay in that bed with them. They want you to walk them down the basement. Uh, so there usually is pushback, and the letter I found helps with that. So this would be kind of step one of SPACE. Here's an example script. You're going to get some of it's cut off, but I provide this to the parents I work with, and then we work together to really highlight what's the most helpful for their family and personalize it. So as you'll see here, I'm gonna take a minute to read it because I want you to hear kind of the message that is coming. This will be printed as parents, the guardians of the household would print this out, write this together, and they would sit down and present this to the child. So we'd say something like, our job as parents is to prepare you for life. Part of that is learning that life is unfair at times. Life is hard. Life has struggle. It's also learning that you can solve your own problems. You don't need us. Maybe you don't always need us. Sometimes you do. When we solve our problems ourselves, we become more confident people. And it's important that we as parents give you the gift of struggle so you can gain confidence. So from now on, you might see mom and dad acting a little differently. And this is where we would highlight whatever the new scaffolding back behavior is. And typically, as I said, we would focus on one. So although I put three here, you would probably pick one. So we might say, honey, Sam, we will no longer be getting items from another room that we know you can get yourself unless you're really struggling and a doctor says that you are in a cast and you need it. So maybe we will be going with you to the other room and waiting, or depending on the situation, if it's all on one floor, we won't be going at all. So we would pick one particular accommodation and try to slowly move back from that accommodation. Kids don't love this. So we have in here, and you'll see some of it's cut off, but the idea that um, the kid we put in the letter, we expect you to hate this. You may get angry at us. And so, you may say, this is unfair, and you want us to solve the problems. And that's okay. You can think it's unfair. You can think we're being mean. And we might give you a journal and you can write down how you're feeling about this. But basically, we prepare in the letter for some dislike of the space plan. The great news is that goes away quite quickly. And so we're talking a matter of weeks that for in particular, like when I work with a family, although space is typically up to like 12 sessions, I find that really long. I try to condense it, and we can really, within a matter of weeks, if we're getting towards this letter being written by week 2, we can see changes by week 3, like dramatic changes where the child is now really feeling good about making changes without the parent present. So it might be going to the basement, it might be falling asleep with the parent sitting in a chair nearby, but not laying down. And eventually we get that chair out of the room. Okay, again, I'm just going to go through this overview and we'll get to questions. Step 2, which I hit on a little bit. So step 1 is really writing the letter, but I already started talking about. We're going to reduce and stop some accommodations and we're going to expose them because that is what gets people through anxiety. In addition to coping skills, it's learning, breaking the phobia, the fear into manageable parts and knowing you can get through it. It builds confidence. So here I laid them out. This one, the going to the basement where the parent sits on the bottom stairs or is halfway there. These are all examples. We never, just as a comment here, we never want to sneak out of a room. We always want to be very honest. We never want to say, Dad will be here all night, and then Dad go grocery shopping late at night. I've had families do things like that. And then if the child wakes up, they learn not to trust us. We always want to be very clear. Mom and Dad will be in the house the rest of the night unless there's an emergency, and we will get you if there's an emergency. But we're not going to tell you every room we're in and what time. Some kids will get very controlling out of the fear. And so maybe we give them the general accommodation of, yes, we will be here, that we will always stay in a house that you're in, but we don't give the detailed. And then we can slowly back away from that. That would be an accommodation we might try to go back from. I also put a note here that while we can expose kids to newspaper articles, we really don't want to use the television news. It's really sensationalized and very fear-based. So I've had a lot of kids where I find out later that one of the sources of the major anxiety is being exposed to hearing CNN in another room. And so we just want to make sure that that's not happening because it is so heightened um, that it can really make anyone scared. Um, okay, then I've had some kids here where it says watch a cartoon where the characters die. I've had some kids who will pause movies, and they will make parents stop movies before a character has, and we're talking Disney films, we're talking very appropriate cartoon films, animated films for kids, they will want to avoid the discomfort of a character having something happen. And while I don't like that either, none of us like, Simba's Mufasa passes away, it is important that we learn how to sit through things, maybe not at age 3, but we do want to move towards the child being able to handle an age-appropriate film with something uncomfortable. Why? Because if we keep avoiding, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and the avoidance grows. So we might set up exposure where we slowly watch something very mild in a cartoon form, and it could just be something silly where a cat, whatever, Tom and Jerry kind of thing. And then we encourage them to and incentivize them to try to get towards something a little bit scarier. So I put this in here just as an example. Of that, where parents are accommodating and they're stopping movies, and then they start to screen movies for their children. And we're talking about just child appropriate films, and that's so loving of the parent to do originally. The problem is that accommodation grows and grows and becomes a dependency, and that's what S.P.A.C.E is targeting. So here's an example. Although I don't watch horror films, I can't handle horror films. This is being able to handle a mild exposure, like Mufasa passing away in Lion King. Here we have day 1, the child or even the adult can't handle it. Day 2, they still can't handle it. They're hiding, they're avoiding. What we're trying to get to is mild amounts of exposure where they do handle little bits. And eventually we get to, you know what? I can handle that. And the child and the adult too will feel much more confident once they've gone through this. We pick something appropriate, of course, that's like sleeping in your own bed while parents are home. That's appropriate because you're still safe. But we do exposures of just little by little moving the parent back away to get them to be exposed. Okay, I am going to look at the time. Okay, we're doing well on time. I'm going to specify a little bit here on space and anxiety and autism in particular, and some of the reasons or ways we want to modify space for children on the spectrum. And really, everything I shared here, all of these, this message of confidence, using language that shows that you support and accept your child, and you get where they're at, that applies. Writing the letter, that typically applies. This all applies and is actually very helpful because the letter, again, is visual because it's real and it lays out logic and rules. And children on the spectrum, many of them really enjoy knowing the rules and what's changing, and having it written feels very real. um, Reducing the accommodations. The only thing we would really want to modify here is probably getting a little more visual. So you see down at the bottom here, this is a kind of a typical graphic or clip art that you might use for a social story. And if you're not familiar with social stories, those are visual explanations of experiences that a child will be going through. And it really helps them understand what's coming and what's happened, and it's just a way of predicting, and it's just a way to communicate what it's similar to a communication board. So for example, if a child on the spectrum, let's say age 5, 6, 7, is going, or even younger, but I would say if they're going to the airport for the first time, we would probably want to identify what might be some new things, new sensations, and new experiences they're going to go through, and use visual representations of those, such as this walk through the scanner, and make it very clear visually in a story format of what's going to happen when we get to O'Hare Airport. This helps kids predict. It helps kids who have kind of black and white thinking that when they're going to a scanner and they've never seen it before, it takes away a lot of that anxiety of like, Now I've talked about it. I've seen it. Maybe you see a video of it. So you have a place in your, brain for a context clue of what that is. I also encourage use of visual timers. So we might use a timer to share, I'm going to be, sitting in this chair in your bedroom while you fall asleep for this many minutes, 15, whatever. And then I'm going to move towards sitting in the corner for this many. And then I'm going to be out in the house cleaning, whatever. So the timer, again, the visual piece about it, it makes it very real and predictable, and it gives us a sense of control. I use it for all kids, but I originally learned while working with children on the spectrum how valuable it was. So those are just some ways we'd want to modify. We might also appeal to logic. Meaning we might give the reasoning of why it's really good to lay in bed and be in bed on your own. So if a kiddo is 11 or even a little bit older, like 10 or 11, we might explain that scientists have shown us kids who lay in their bed on their own with their parents in the house, but on their own and fall asleep, have less anxiety than the kids who are sleeping in the bed with the parents. And you would think that you would think this is backwards, but it's actually the case that when you can do things on your own, you feel better. So sometimes with children on the spectrum, it's helpful to give little pieces of logic or even research because it just sort of solidifies and explains why we're doing what we're doing. We're not trying to be mean and leave you in your room. We're trying to do what's actually best for your confidence levels. Okay, so I'm going to now share a little bit that is a little bit more, it's similar to SPACE, but this is just an approach that I've kind of come to over the years of 15 years of doing this and hopefully is
The
helpful. It's sort
opposite
of my
record.
take.
You know this app is going to charge you.
Um,
At least now you know,
Make
right?
sure you're muted. Okay, thanks. So we're going to go through this few slides and then we're going to open up to questions. We're actually going to be doing really well on time. So we'll be able to get to some specific questions. So kids will get stuck and spiral on big feelings. And here you have some examples. You always give my sister more and I'm dumb. Now, so that's totally common. And here's what's also very common. And I hope none of us would judge this mom. We would never, this sounds totally appropriate. Here she has a daughter who does not want to, she's saying, I don't like math or math is hard. And the mom says, oh, sweetie, I know you're worried about the big test, but you do great when you study. Remember how you got a B on your last test? You're so good at math. Lovely, right? I hope we would all say, what an incredible mom. She's trying to reassure her. She's using logic of things this kid actually did. She's trying to build her up. What an amazing mom. The problem is with some kids, this amazing mom who's doing nothing wrong is not effective. With some kids, you get, no, I'm not. I'm the worst at math. So even though there's nothing wrong with it for some kids, for other kids, it might be like, you're right, mom. I did get a B. I got this. That would be amazing. If that's what response you're getting, keep on going. If it's not the response you're getting and you're getting more of a doubling down in resistance, it's a sign it's not probably the best approach with your child. And this is more common than not. So we think, and therapists are taught to reassure, we're taught to help problem solve, over validate. So what's so hard is coming into this as a therapist, a trained therapist 15 years ago. This is, of course, what I would want to do as a school social worker for 10 years, and it wouldn't work for a lot of kids. And what you find out is what you're accidentally doing, why it doesn't work for some kids, again, for some it does, is you're accidentally getting stuck with the kid. The kid is saying, I'm stuck. And you're then talking with the kid about their stuck, and you're kind of modeling, I'm stopping what I'm doing and I'm getting stuck with you about it. I'm talking to you about it. What I find and what the research supports is a little bit more effective with those type of kids where it doesn't work would be something more like this. It would be sending a message of confidence and then taking some space or distracting. And so it would look like this. First, we validate. which is consistent with space. We wanted to be accepting. So, oh, it sounds like you're feeling angry about the math test, whatever this young lady is feeling. You don't have to agree, just as a note, we don't have to agree. Or you're feeling you're going to fail the math test. Sounds like you're feeling you're going to fail the math test. You just have to understand. You don't have to agree. Then we send the message of confidence. I know you'll do great on the math test, but that's not how you're feeling. Then the last piece that most people are, this is the part where they're not really adding this, would be something where we model we are not stuck. We're so confident they're going to get through that math test that we can say, hey, which houses did you want to go to for Halloween? I really love that house in the corner. They give whole candy bars. We can model that we're moving on. We've validated, we've sent our message of confidence, and then we can say, we can even say if that doesn't work, we can say, you know what, I really want to play magnet tiles with you, but I need to wait till you're calm, until you've moved on from this. I can't do math. I'm bad at math. So this is just an addition to space that's really kind of my own, but I found it very helpful. I hope some of you will find it helpful that if you can model that you are unstuck after you've validated and shown confidence, you'll see the kids get unstuck faster. Um, just a little tip. A couple, like literally two other slides, and then we're going to open it up, is kids will sometimes repeat questions over and over. When are you picking me up? I need to know when you're picking me up. Well, is Sam going to be in the car? Blah, blah, blah. It's really helpful and important that even with space where we might be reducing an accommodation, we start to reduce how much we reassure. And so that might mean we have the letter and we write to the kiddo and we say, I will now be answering questions about me picking you up or about things you're nervous about once. I answer them once, and then after that, I don't respond. And kids get angry. They do get angry about this, and then it gets better. So it's like this, when we plot it, it's an extinction burst of them really trying to, why won't you tell me you don't love me? I don't love you. What's going on? And then they actually can get to a place of handling not being able to get an answer for everything. But this might be something we pick. And so we might say, I'll answer you once. And we might even set a boundary of try asking me again in a calmer tone instead of the anxious tone. Then we answer once, I'm picking you up at 4 o'clock. And then they ask again, 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 and say, I'm done talking about that. You're going to do great. So we set a loving boundary and we do not keep reassuring because that is us getting sucked in. So that's just a comment on repeated questions. This is a plan that I teach families that on really helping them know how to respond to dysregulated emotions, which sometimes applies with anxiety. And so I won't get into too much of this, but essentially what you're going to want to do is when your kiddo is calm, the last piece that I feel like space doesn't do, but I would love to add, is when your kiddo handles something and gets through something, we really want to give a burst of praise of how flexible and how much they handle, how great it was, how good they must feel that they handled it. Some kids don't like the praise, and because that's about you like enjoying it, and they often kind of want the control, like don't take over my, don't take my rainbow away. And it's really more about if you say, I can sense how much you are enjoying that, or that must have really felt good for you to be able to go to the basement with me only being there halfway. How was that? But we give the praise about how they must feel, how confident it must feel for them. So that's just a little comment on that. And then I have something on if you have siblings who are accommodating, we do need to make sure if siblings are going to the basement for them, if siblings are saying, you can sleep in my room, that is an issue because then it's actually preventing your child from having to sit with discomfort because the sibling is as sweet as can be. I mean, it's the sweetest thing you can ever experience. Is I went to a second grade classroom once where the entire class was accommodating this young girl who we have a diagnosis of what we call selective mutism. She wouldn't talk, but at home she talked, she would dance and sing, but at school she refused to talk. So they were pulling out her chair, they were getting her backpack, they were helping her do her homework, it was the sweetest thing. But I had to come in and share, she's capable of doing all those things. It's so kind of you, but we only do that when somebody can't do something. So if anyone comes into class in a wheelchair for that week, we need to help open the door. If anyone comes in the class and they can't see the board because they have, an eye patch on, their vision isn't good, we help them. It's when there's an actual disability, not when a child just won't do it. So we did that. We had a conversation with the student alone that we were going to do that, presented it to the class, and then they stopped accommodating. And then she started doing things. She started talking. She started, coming into class. So reducing accommodation, even in siblings, is also going to be important. Okay, I hope I did not go too fast or overwhelm. I wanted to be able to give you an overview. There are some other resources like this space video that I will not show, but there are available on the slides. But I want to open it up, and maybe we could open it up to the chat if anyone wants to write in any questions.